On July 23, 2007, 24-year-old Amanda Rose set out on a one-week hiking trip along the trails of Olympic National Park in the state of Washington. She was an experienced hiker who had completed dozens of routes in parks along the West Coast, had all the necessary equipment, and was in excellent physical condition. She planned to hike the Hoh Rainforest route, one of the most beautiful but also one of the most remote areas of the park. The trail runs through a temperate rainforest where trees reach heights of up to 50 meters and the humidity is almost tropical. The route takes 5 to 7 days and leads far away from civilization. Tourists are rarely encountered there, as are park rangers who patrol the area. Amanda checked in at the park entrance, filled out the route registration form, listed her planned stopping points, and provided her return date, July 30th. The ranger at the entrance, a middle-aged man with a gray beard, inspected her gear, issued her a permit to stay overnight at designated campsites along the trail, warned her about bears and the need to store food in bear-resistant containers, and wished her a good hike. Amanda got into her car, drove to the trailhead, left the car in the parking lot, locked it, hid the keys under the front wheel in a magnetic box, shouldered her backpack, and headed into the forest. The first 2 days passed without incident. Amanda hiked along a well-marked trail, took lunch breaks by streams, photographed the forest and wildlife such as deer and squirrels, and once saw a bear in the distance that did not pay her any attention. She stayed overnight at designated campsites, pitched her tent, cooked dinner on a portable stove, and wrote her impressions in her journal. She met a few other hikers along the way, a middle-aged couple, a group of students, and a lone man with a camera. They exchanged greetings and brief conversations about the weather and the route, then continued on their way. On the evening of July 25th, the third day of her hike, Amanda stopped at campsite number 7, a small clearing deep in the forest equipped with a wooden table, a fire pit, and a simple toilet. She set up her tent, cooked dinner, and was sitting by the campfire when she heard footsteps. A man emerged from the forest wearing a park ranger uniform, a green shirt with the National Park Service emblem, pants, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. A radio, a flashlight, and a knife hung from his belt. He appeared to be about 45 years old, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair streaked with gray, a weathered face, gray eyes, and an alert gaze. He introduced himself as James Carter, a ranger patrolling the area and checking to make sure that visitors were safe. Amanda showed him her permit. He looked it over and nodded. He asked whether she was hiking alone, where she was from, and where she was headed. She replied that she was alone, that she was from Seattle, and that she planned to hike the entire Hoh Rainforest route all the way to the coast. James nodded and said that the route was good but demanding, that the trail would become less passable farther on, and that she needed to be careful, especially when crossing streams, which could become dangerous after rainfall. He sat by the campfire for about 10 minutes. They talked about the park, the wilderness, and the work of a ranger. Then he stood up, said goodbye, continued down the trail, and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. Amanda went to sleep around 10 o'clock that night. She crawled into her sleeping bag and closed the tent. The night was calm, filled with forest sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the murmur of a nearby stream. She fell asleep quickly, tired after a full day of hiking. She woke up because of a sound, a sharp, loud noise, as if someone were slicing fabric. She opened her eyes. Inside the tent, it was dark, with only faint moonlight filtering through the material. The sound came again. She understood. Someone was cutting the tent open from the outside. A knife blade sliced through the fabric. She tried to scream, but a large, strong gloved hand covered her mouth. The other hand grabbed her by the throat, squeezing and cutting off her air. She tried to break free, kicking and striking with her arms and legs, but the strength was unequal. A large male figure forced his way through the tear in the tent. In the dim light, she saw his face. It was James Carter, the same ranger who had come by the campfire that evening. He held her until she stopped resisting from lack of air and lost consciousness. Then he loosened his grip around her neck, allowed her to breathe, but continued to cover her mouth. With his other hand, he bound her hands behind her back with a rope, quickly and skillfully, tying tight knots. Then he bound her legs. He stuffed a gag into her mouth, a piece of fabric that he tied behind her head. He dragged her out of the tent, hoisted her onto his shoulder, and carried her through the forest. Amanda tried to resist and twist away, but bound and exhausted, she could do nothing. Screaming was useless. The gag prevented loud sounds, and there was no one anywhere nearby who could have heard her. He carried her for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, through dense forest where there was no trail, through bushes, across a stream, and up a hill. Finally, he stopped and set her down on the ground. Amanda looked around. They were standing in front of a small wooden building that resembled a cabin or a shed, hidden among the trees, its roof covered with moss, its walls old and darkened by time. James opened the door with a key he took from his pocket, pulled her inside, closed the door, and locked it. Inside, it was dark. It smelled of dampness and wood. James lit a kerosene lamp hanging on the wall. The light illuminated the room. It was a single room, about 4 by 5 meters in size, with a wooden floor, log walls, a metal stove in one corner with a stack of firewood beside it, a table, a chair, and a narrow bed against the opposite wall. Tools hung on the wall: an axe, a saw, a hammer, chains. There were no windows, only the door through which they had entered. James laid Amanda on the floor, crouched beside her, and removed the gag. She screamed. He struck her in the face, not hard, but hard enough to make her stop. He said quietly and calmly that screaming was pointless, that she was in the middle of the forest and no one would hear her, that he would gag her again and would not untie her if she screamed. He said that she would stay here now, that she would do what he told her, that everything would be tolerable if she obeyed, and that it would hurt if she did not. His voice was even and emotionless, as if he were explaining rules. Amanda asked in a trembling voice why he was doing this, what he wanted. James did not answer immediately. He simply looked at her for a long time. Then he said that he needed company, that he had lived alone for many years, that he was tired of loneliness, that she would stay with him and live here and would get used to it over time. He said that no one would find her, that the cabin was far from the hiking trails, that he was a ranger and knew the park like the back of his hand, that search teams would look elsewhere, and that everyone would assume she had gotten lost or fallen into a ravine and that her body had been carried away by a river. He untied her feet, but left her hands bound. He took a chain hanging on the wall, fastened one into a metal ring embedded in the floor next to the bed, wrapped the other end around her ankle, and secured it with a lock. The chain was about 2 meters long and allowed her to move within part of the room, but not reach the door. He untied her hands so that she could move and eat, but warned her that he would bind her again and leave her without food or water for several days if she tried to attack him or escape. Thus began her life in the cabin. The first days were a nightmare. James came twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. He brought food and water, removed the bucket that served as a toilet, and replaced it with a clean one. The food was simple: canned goods, bread, sometimes fresh fish that he had caught in the stream and cooked on the stove. The water came in bottles, cold, from a spring. He spoke little to her, mostly giving commands: eat, sleep, be quiet. When he left, he locked the door from the outside and left her alone for hours. At first, Amanda tried to resist. She screamed, demanded to be released, threatened that he would be found, imprisoned, and punished. James listened silently and did not respond to the threats. Once, when she screamed especially loudly, he bound her, gagged her, and left her without food for 2 days. When he returned, he asked whether she would behave quietly. She nodded, exhausted, hungry, and terrified. He untied her and gave her food and water. After that, she screamed less. She understood that it was pointless and only made the situation worse. The first rape occurred on the 4th day. James came as usual in the evening and brought dinner with him. He set the plate on the table, sat down on a chair, and looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up, went to her, grabbed her by the arm, and dragged her to the bed. Amanda resisted, scratched, and bit, but he was stronger. He struck her several times, bound her hands, and forced her down onto the bed. He raped her brutally, ignoring her screams and pleas. When he was finished, he untied her, left, and locked the door. Amanda lay on the bed, crying and shaking from shock and pain. She understood that this was not the end, that it would happen again, that she was trapped in a place from which there was no escape. She thought about suicide, searched for a way to hang herself with the chain or to cut her wrists. But James left nothing sharp behind. The chain was too short to reach the beam in the ceiling. All that remained was to suffer, to wait, and to hope that someone would find her. When Amanda did not return from her hike at the agreed time on July 30th, her family in Seattle began to worry. Her father called the office of Olympic National Park and reported that his daughter had not checked in and had not returned home. The park rangers reviewed the registration records, found Amanda's route plan, and confirmed that she was supposed to finish her hike on July 30th. They organized a search operation. A group of 10 rangers and volunteers searched the route through the Hoh rainforest, checked all marked campsites, and looked for signs of her presence. At campsite number 7, they found her tent slashed open. The items inside were untouched: sleeping bag, sleeping pad, clothing, food. The backpack lay next to the tent. Its contents were still there. Apart from the slashed tent, there were no signs of a struggle. On the ground were shoe prints matching Amanda's size, as well as larger male footprints leading from the tent into the forest, but they disappeared after about 50 meters on a rocky section. The search was expanded. Tracking dogs and a helicopter with a thermal imaging camera were deployed. The area around the campsite was searched within a radius of 15 kilometers. Rivers, ravines, and caves were checked. Her car was found in the parking lot, untouched. The keys were still in the magnetic box. Inside, everything was in order. There were no signs of trouble. This confirmed that something had happened on the route and not before it. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. The official version stated that Amanda Rose had gotten lost in the forest, possibly fallen and been injured, died of hypothermia or dehydration, and that her body had been carried away by a river or eaten by animals. The case was classified as an accident. The investigation remained open, but active searching was discontinued. The family did not give up. They hired private investigators, placed notices, and offered a reward for information, without success. In the cabin, time passed slowly. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Amanda lost her sense of time and no longer knew the date or even the month. James gave her no calendar and did not speak about the outside world. The only markers of time were the changing seasons. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill, then to winter cold, when the cabin had to be heated every day to avoid freezing. Then spring came again, and summer. James came every day, morning and evening. He brought food and water, sometimes fresh vegetables and meat. He hunted deer and fished. He cooked on the stove, sometimes ate with her, sat at the table, chewed silently, and stared into space. He spoke rarely, mostly about practical matters. More firewood was needed. The roof had to be repaired because it leaked after rain. He told almost nothing about himself. He answered Amanda's questions with single words or not at all. The rapes became regular, 2 to 3 times a week. After the first months, Amanda stopped resisting because she understood that resistance only made him angry and led to beatings and additional humiliation. She learned to mentally shut down during the acts, to withdraw into herself and imagine that she was somewhere else and that this was not happening to her. This was the only way to preserve at least part of her mental health. The chain on her leg rubbed her skin raw, creating a wound that became inflamed and oozed. One day, James noticed this, brought ointment, treated the wounds, and bandaged them. He said that he did not want her to die from an infection. They had to take care of her. He gave her soap, a rag, and a bucket of water to wash herself. Once a month, he allowed her to bathe in a nearby stream under his supervision. He removed the chain from her leg, but kept a knife ready and warned her that he would catch and punish her if she tried to escape. Amanda tried to start conversations, to learn more about him, to understand his motives, to find a way to influence him and convince him to let her go. She asked why he was doing this, whether he had a family, and why he was alone. James answered little and reluctantly. Once, after about half a year of her captivity, on a cold winter evening as they sat by the stove, he told her a little about himself. He had been a ranger for 20 years, had worked in different parks, and for the last 10 years had served in Olympic National Park. He had been married and had a daughter. His wife had left him 15 years earlier, taken their daughter with her, and said that he spent too much time in the forest. She was tired of the loneliness and wanted a normal life in the city. They divorced. The daughter grew up, no longer had any contact with him, lived on the East Coast, was married, and had children of her own. He was left alone, worked, lived in a ranger cabin, went on patrols, met tourists, and helped people who got lost. Life was empty, monotonous, and meaningless. Then, about 3 years earlier, he met a tourist who was walking through the park alone. They talked. She was beautiful, intelligent, and laughed at his jokes. He offered to accompany her on one of the routes and show her places that ordinary tourists never got to see. She agreed. They set out together, spent the day together, and in the evening he invited her to his cabin and suggested that she stay there instead of sleeping in a tent. She agreed. There was intimacy that was voluntary and pleasant for both of them. In the morning she left and promised to write to him. She did not write. He waited 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, nothing. He realized that for her it had been only a casual affair, a distraction, nothing serious. After that, he began to think that all women were the same, that they used men and then left them alone. The anger grew and accumulated. When he saw Amanda at the campsite, beautiful, young, and alone, something clicked in his head. He decided that this time the woman would not leave, that he would make sure she stayed with him, whether she wanted to or not. That was how it began. Amanda listened and was horrified. She understood that she was dealing not only with a criminal, but with a person whose psyche was broken, who lived in a distorted reality in which abduction and violence were justified by his loneliness and grievances. She realized that it was pointless to try to convince him with logic or moral arguments to let her go. All that remained was to wait for a mistake, for a moment when she could escape. 1 year passed, then a second. Amanda adapted as best she could to life in captivity. She established a routine. She got up at sunrise, when light filtered through the cracks in the walls, did simple exercises to stay in shape, washed her face with cold water, and ate whatever James had left for her. During the day, she tried to keep herself occupied. She read the only book James had brought her at her request, an old, worn novel, counted the floorboards, and tried to meditate so as not to lose her mind from boredom and isolation. In the evening, when James came, she talked with him, tried to be compliant, sometimes smiled, and thanked him for the food, not out of love or because of Stockholm Syndrome, but in order to survive. She knew that he could become even more malicious and cruel if she was constantly hostile. It was better to play a role, to appear submissive, and to wait for an opportunity. The opportunity came in the third year, in the fall of 2010, in early October. James came as usual in the morning, but he looked unwell. His face was pale, he was breathing heavily, and he was coughing. He said that he was sick, probably a cold, and that he would bring more food so that he would not have to come for a few days until he recovered. He brought several cans of food, bottles of water, and firewood for the stove. Then he left and locked the door. For 3 days, he did not come. On the fourth day, Amanda heard the sound of a key in the lock. The door opened. James came in, staggered, and held on to the doorframe. His face was gray, his eyes feverish, and his whole body was trembling. He reached a chair, collapsed onto it, and breathed heavily. He said that he felt very ill, that he needed medication, but that there was none in the cabin, and that he had to go to his ranger cabin where there was a first aid kit. However, he said he no longer had the strength. Amanda moved toward him as far as the chain allowed. She asked whether she could help him. James looked at her with a dull gaze and nodded slowly. He said that if she removed the chain, she had to promise not to run away, to help him get to his cabin, and to fetch the medication. If she ran away, he would die there, and she would remain locked inside and also die because the door was locked from the outside and he had the key in his pocket. Amanda realized that it was a trap, but also an opportunity. She promised not to run away and to help him. James took the key for the chain lock from his pocket, bent forward with difficulty, and opened the lock. The chain fell to the floor. For the first time in 3 years, Amanda felt freedom of movement, no weight on her ankle. She helped James to his feet. He leaned on her shoulder, and they left the cabin. Outside, it was daytime. The sun shone through the treetops, and the air was fresh and cold. For the first time in 3 years, Amanda saw the sky and the forest and felt the wind on her face. For a moment, she wanted to run immediately, but she knew that without the door key she would not be able to get out, and that James, even if he was sick, could still be dangerous, could catch her or lock the door, leaving her outside, where she could get lost and die in an unfamiliar forest without equipment and food. They walked slowly. James leaned heavily on her. His steps were unsteady. They walked for about 20 minutes along a barely visible path through the forest, crossed a stream on a wooden bridge, and went up a slope. Eventually, they reached another cabin, larger than the first, with windows, a porch, and a sign on the door. James took out a key, opened the door, and they went inside. Inside was a normal room, a bed, a table, chairs, shelves with books and equipment, a radio on the table, and a first aid kit on the wall. James pointed to the first aid kit and said that there were antibiotics and fever reducers there that needed to be taken. Amanda went over, opened the kit, and saw medication, bandages, and instruments. She took a package of antibiotics and brought it to James. He swallowed a tablet and washed it down with water from a bottle that stood on the table. Then he said that he needed to lie down, that he felt very unwell. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. His breathing was heavy and irregular. Amanda stood there, looking at him, her thoughts racing. This is a chance. He is weak. Maybe he will lose consciousness. I can take the keys, escape, and find the way back to civilization. On the table lay a radio with which she could call for help. She went to the table, picked up the radio, and turned it on. Static, interference, then a voice. The dispatcher asked who was on the line and what the situation was. Amanda pressed the transmit button and began to speak. Her voice was shaking, her words tangled. She said that she was Amanda Rose, missing for 3 years, that she was being held captive by Ranger James Carter, that he was sick, that she was in his service cabin, and that she urgently needed help. The dispatcher did not answer immediately. The pause lasted several seconds. Then a cautious voice asked whether this was true and whether she could confirm her identity. Amanda gave her date of birth, her address, the names of her parents, and other details that only she could know. The dispatcher said that help was on the way, that she should stay where she was and not move, and that a helicopter would arrive in 20 minutes. Amanda put the radio down and turned around. James was standing behind her. He had gotten up from the bed. His face was angry and distorted. In his hand, he held a knife that he had taken from the table. He said that she had betrayed him. She had promised not to run away. Now everything was over. He would go to prison. She would pay for her betrayal. He lunged at her. The knife raised to strike. Amanda jumped back, grabbed a chair, and threw it at him. The chair hit him on the shoulder. James stumbled and fell to his knees. She rushed to the door, ran out onto the porch, and fled down the path without knowing where it led. The only thing that mattered was getting away from him. She ran and heard shouts and footsteps behind her. James ran after her, injured but still fast, because he knew the forest. Amanda ran with all her strength. Her feet stumbled over roots. Branches whipped her face. Her lungs burned, but fear gave her strength. She ran into an open clearing, stumbled, and fell. She turned around. James was about 20 meters away, running with a knife in his hand, his face twisted with rage. Then she heard a sound. The sound of a helicopter, loud and rapidly approaching. A helicopter appeared above the treetops and landed in the clearing. People in uniform jumped out, park rangers and police officers with weapons. They shouted, ordering James to stop and drop the knife. James froze, looking at the helicopter and the people surrounding him. He realized that everything was over. He dropped the knife, sank to his knees, and covered his face with his hands. The police officers rushed forward, restrained him, placed him in handcuffs, and led him away. Amanda lay on the ground and cried, not from pain, but from relief, because she understood that it was truly over, that she was free, that the nightmare had ended. A paramedic ran to her, helped her up, hugged her, and told her that everything was all right, that she was safe. She was flown by helicopter to a hospital in Port Angeles, the nearest city. There, doctors examined her and documented her injuries, signs of violence, scars from a chain around her ankle, bruises of varying ages, exhaustion, and dehydration. A psychologist spoke with her, diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, and said that long-term treatment would be necessary. The police took her statement. Amanda told them everything: the abduction, the captivity, the rapes, and the life in the cabin for 3 years. The investigators wrote everything down, their faces growing darker with every word. They told her that James Carter had been arrested, charged with kidnapping, rape, and unlawful imprisonment, and that he was facing life in prison. Amanda's family flew in from Seattle. The reunion was filled with tears. Her parents could not believe that their daughter was alive. They hugged and kissed her and cried. Amanda cried as well. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like a human being again and not like a prisoner, not like an object. The trial took place 1 year later, in November 2011. James Carter stood trial on multiple charges. Amanda testified and described everything she had endured. James's attorney attempted to prove that he was not criminally responsible and presented evidence of mental illness and depression. However, the psychiatric evaluation found him competent to stand trial and fully responsible for his actions. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced James Carter to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. As James was led out of the courtroom, he looked at Amanda and whispered something, but she did not hear it and did not want to hear it. It was the last time she ever saw him. After the trial, Amanda tried to return to a normal life. She moved from Seattle to another city, changed her name, began therapy, and attended a support group for survivors of violence. She worked on her recovery, both physically and psychologically. The process was long and painful, but gradually she began to feel better. In 2013, she gave several interviews to journalists and told her story publicly. She wanted people to know that such things can happen, that even in a national park, a place considered safe, predators can exist. She wanted to warn other women who hike alone to be cautious, not to blindly trust people in uniform, to check identification, and to always share their routes with someone. The National Park Service conducted an internal investigation and found that James Carter was indeed a ranger and had worked in the park for 20 years, but had become increasingly withdrawn in recent years, avoided colleagues, and spent a great deal of time alone on patrol. No one had suspected that he was capable of such crimes. The cabin where he held Amanda was an old, abandoned wooden structure that did not appear on modern maps. James knew about it and used it as a hiding place. After the incident, new rules were introduced. Rangers were required to patrol in pairs, undergo regular psychological evaluations, and tourists, especially women, were advised to hike in groups. However, the park is enormous, covering about 3,000 square kilometers, and it is impossible to fully control it. Today, many years later, Amanda lives a normal life. She works, has a family and children, but the scars remain, both physical and psychological. She has never gone hiking again, avoids forests, and feels uncomfortable in enclosed spaces. She regularly sees a therapist and takes medication for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. But she is alive. She is free. And that is what matters most.